The world had ended. The United States, once the land of the free, had crumbled into an unrecognizable, decaying ruin. America, the great beacon of hope and power, was no more. It had fallen in a matter of months, a twisted reversal of the freedom that once defined it. And it all started with a virus. A virus that changed everything. Erin Parker sat on the edge of an abandoned highway, the weight of her rifle resting against her shoulder as she surveyed the horizon. What had once been a bustling cityscape lay before her, now reduced to skeletal remains. Buildings, now hollowed out by time and neglect, reached toward the sky like tombstones marking the deaths of the civilization that had once flourished there. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the wind howling through the broken windows and the occasional rustle of dried leaves. In the early days of the outbreak, Erin had been one of the lucky ones. She had managed to escape before the worst of it hit. She had witnessed the horror firsthand, the world descending into chaos as the infected swarmed the streets. But that was then. Now, she was one of the few survivors left in a country overrun by the undead. The infection was simple at first. It spread like wildfire, infecting the population with a speed no one could have predicted. It was a flu at first, something people shrugged off. But by the time they realized it was far worse than any flu, it was too late. The virus changed people, turned them into monstrous versions of their former selves, driven only by hunger for human flesh. Most of the world had collapsed. Governments, unable to keep up with the escalating crisis, had crumbled. The military, overwhelmed and unprepared, was decimated. People had tried to fight back, to hold on to some shred of normalcy, but it was a losing battle. Erin had seen the first-hand destruction in her own town, a small suburban area in the heart of Pennsylvania. It had happened so fast. She remembered how the infection spread so quickly, how the familiar faces of neighbors and friends twisted into something monstrous. She had been forced to run, leaving behind everything she had ever known. Her family was gone. Her friends were gone. The world she had once called home was now just a memory. But Erin wasn't like the others. She wasn't going to give up. She couldn't. She had survived so far by relying on her instincts, adapting quickly to a new world where nothing was certain. No place was safe. No person could be trusted. Every corner, every alley, every shadow was a potential threat. The world had become a hunting ground, and Erin had learned how to be both the hunter and the hunted. As she continued to scan the horizon, she noticed movement. In the distance, a lone figure shuffled through the rubble of a destroyed building. At first, Erin tensed, her finger instinctively resting on the trigger of her rifle. But as the figure drew closer, she saw it wasn't an infected, it was a survivor. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen another human in days. The thought of human contact, safety, even, seemed like a distant dream, but the reality was far more dangerous than she remembered. The survivor was cautiously moving through the broken streets, his eyes darting around nervously. Erin could tell he was on edge, looking for something, or someone. Without thinking, she stood up, adjusting her gear as she moved toward him, keeping her distance for now. She had learned long ago not to trust people so easily. The world had made people desperate, and desperate people could be more dangerous than the infected. "Hey," she called out, keeping her voice calm and steady, but loud enough to be heard. The man froze, his eyes locking onto her. She saw the flicker of fear in his gaze. He had probably heard the stories of the desperate survivors who would do anything to get what they wanted. "Who are you?" Erin asked, her rifle still slung over her shoulder but her posture cautious. The man hesitated, glancing around as if weighing his options. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse. "Just a guy trying to survive. Like you." Erin didn't trust him, but she couldn't afford to ignore the possibility that he might know something she didn't. There were always rumors, of other survivors, of safe zones, of places where the infected hadn't yet overrun. "Where are you headed?" she asked, trying to gauge whether he was truly alone or just a trap waiting to be sprung. The man shifted uncomfortably. "I'm looking for a place. A place where I heard there are others. People who are still holding out. Have you heard of it?" Aaron thought for a moment. A place? There had been whispers of safe havens, but she had long since stopped believing in fairy tales. Most of them had turned out to be false hopes, traps that led to death. But something about the man's desperation rang true. If there was even a chance. Where? She asked cautiously. Tell me. I might know something. As he began to speak, Aaron's mind raced. There was more to this man than he was letting on, and she had learned the hard way not to trust anyone too easily. The world was too dangerous now, and she had to be smart if she was going to make it. But for now, they were in the same fight for survival. And Aaron knew one thing for sure: if there was a chance to survive, she'd take it, no matter what. The man's eyes flickered nervously as he spoke, his voice raw from days of disuse. There's a place to the north. Near the remnants of what used to be a military base. I've heard rumors about it, a group of survivors who've set up some kind of stronghold. He paused, watching Aaron carefully, as if waiting for her reaction. Aaron's brow furrowed. A stronghold? It sounded too good to be true, and that was exactly why she couldn't afford to get her hopes up. Every survivor she'd met since the collapse had shared similar stories. Some were true, some were nothing more than lies to keep hope alive. The world was full of deception now. You're sure about this? Aaron asked, her voice steady but cold. You've seen it? He shook his head. No. But I've heard it from people I trust. Aaron didn't answer immediately. She took a few steps back, glancing around to ensure the area was still safe. She wasn't one to let her guard down, and in a world like this, there was no such thing as a simple conversation. Trust had become a luxury most couldn't afford. I've heard those stories before, Aaron finally said. People claiming to know of safe places, only for it to end in death or worse. She met his eyes, watching for any sign of deceit. How do I know you're not leading me into a trap? He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, the unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps broke the fragile silence. Aaron's body went tense, her hand instinctively reaching for the grip of her rifle. She raised her finger to her lips, signaling the man to stay quiet. Slowly, she crouched behind a nearby car, peering around the corner. A small group of the infected, horrific, disfigured remnants of humanity wandered aimlessly in the distance. Their slow, uneven steps seemed almost mechanical, like they were searching for something. Or someone. Aaron's heart raced, her mind calculating the distance, the time it would take for them to reach her. The infected couldn't see or hear well, but they were still dangerous. Their senses had been twisted, distorted into something far more deadly than anything a human could comprehend. Stay down, she whispered to the man, her voice tight with urgency. He nodded quickly, crouching beside her. For a few moments, all Aaron could hear was the soft, rhythmic shuffle of the infected as they moved further down the road. Their grotesque faces were turned away from her, but Aaron didn't let herself relax. Not yet. She had learned the hard way that the moment you let your guard down was the moment you paid the price. The man next to her seemed to be holding his breath, his eyes locked on the infected group. He was scared, rightfully so. But Aaron had seen worse. She had faced down worse. She had learned how to survive in a world where the undead weren't the only thing to fear. When the group of infected was finally out of sight, Aaron exhaled sharply, her tense body slowly relaxing. We need to keep moving, she said, her voice low and controlled. The man gave a quick nod, standing up carefully, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Right. But you didn't answer my question, he said, his voice shaking slightly. What about the place I mentioned? Aaron glanced at him. He wasn't just asking for her to help him. He was desperate to find something real in this hellhole of a world. She could see it in his eyes. But she didn't share his hope. I'm not sure yet, she replied, her voice hardening. You can't trust anyone, not even me. But maybe we can make it there. If the rumors are true, we'll find out soon enough. The man swallowed, the brief flicker of hope in his eyes replaced with uncertainty. He followed Aaron as she moved cautiously through the wreckage of the city, always keeping an eye out for danger. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, they told her that this man wasn't to be fully trusted, yet. As they moved forward, the silence between them was thick with the weight of their situation. Erin couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her gut was telling her that this man knew more than he was letting on. But the world had changed in ways she could never have imagined, and everyone had their own secrets now. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, dodging infected groups and avoiding danger at every turn. Eventually, they found a small, dilapidated gas station on the outskirts of town. It had been ransacked long ago, but it offered some semblance of shelter. Erin hesitated for a moment, considering their options. "Let's stop here for the night," she said. "We'll move out at first light." The man nodded, his eyes scanning the area warily. "Thanks," he muttered. "I don't know where I'd be without you." Erin didn't respond. She didn't need to. She wasn't doing this out of the kindness of her heart. She had her own reasons for helping him, reasons that had nothing to do with charity. She had learned that trusting others was a dangerous game in this world, but sometimes, survival required playing that game, even if you didn't fully understand the stakes. As she set up camp inside the gas station, Erin felt the familiar pang of uncertainty settle deep in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if the place the man had mentioned was real or just another lie. But for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that there was something left worth fighting for. Tomorrow, they would move again. Tomorrow, they would find out if the rumors were true. And maybe, just maybe, they would find a place where survival was no longer a game of chance. The sun was barely a sliver on the horizon when Erin stirred from her makeshift bed behind the counter of the gas station. The night had passed uneventfully, but sleep had been elusive. Every sound, every whisper of wind through the cracked windows, made her nerves tighten. This world had no place for comfort, and she knew better than to let her guard down, even for a moment. The man, whose name she still didn't know, was already awake, packing up his small bundle of belongings. He moved with the quiet urgency of someone who had been in survival mode for too long. His eyes flicked up to meet hers as she stood, stretching her stiff muscles. "You ready?" he asked, his voice hoarse but steady. Erin nodded. She had learned not to waste time on pleasantries. "Yeah. Let's go." They left the gas station in silence, slipping out through the broken door and back into the desolate streets. The city was still. The only signs of life were the occasional scavenger, human or infected, roaming the wreckage in search of something to consume or steal. As they moved cautiously through the city, Erin couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The place they were heading, the so-called safe zone, had been an idea she'd dismissed, a far-off hope that had no place in reality. Still, the whispers in the wind about survivors fighting to hold on to the last remnants of the world had stirred something in her. The idea of finding a group of people who were still fighting, still clinging to a semblance of humanity, it was almost too much to ignore. But as the hours passed, the distance between them and the city grew, and the weight of the world outside the safety of the crumbled city started to press down on Erin's chest. She found herself scanning the empty horizon more frequently, always on the lookout for signs of danger. They were in the heart of what had once been the Midwestern United States, now reduced to a wild, untamed land where even the roads had started to disappear beneath the relentless force of nature. "Where exactly are we going?" Erin asked, her voice breaking the silence between them. The man, whose face was drawn and weathered by the hardships of the last few months, hesitated. "It's not far," he said. "About a day's walk. I've been there before, just, not for a while. Things change fast out here." Erin didn't trust him. She hadn't trusted anyone for months, not since the fall of her town, when betrayal had come from the unlikeliest of places. But this man, something about him made her suspicious. She could feel it in her gut, the tightness, the sense that this was all part of some larger puzzle, one she was just beginning to piece together. The man's vague answers, the way he never fully met her eyes, the way he hesitated every time she asked about the safe zone, it all felt wrong. But for now, she had no choice but to follow. They didn't have the luxury of splitting up, she needed him for now, and that need outweighed the rising doubts in her mind. As the hours dragged on, the landscape began to change. The flat, barren fields gave way to dense, overgrown forests. The once familiar hum of the world had been replaced by the whispers of wind in the trees and the occasional rustle of an animal, or something more dangerous, moving through the brush. By midday, the silence between Aaron and the man had grown thicker, each step further from the city drawing them closer to whatever fate awaited. The infection had already spread far across the country, but there were places, isolated, forgotten places, where the infection hadn't yet reached. They had to be careful, though. The longer they stayed in one place, the more likely they would be to encounter something deadly. Suddenly, the man stopped in his tracks. His eyes widened, and his face drained of color. "What is it?" Aaron whispered, instinctively reaching for her rifle. Her heart began to race. The man's hand shot out to grab her arm, his grip tight and desperate. "We're not alone," he muttered. Before Aaron could respond, she heard the unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps. A low growl echoed from the trees, and Aaron's stomach dropped. Infected. But how had they found them? She hadn't heard anything, no moans, no shrieks. Her pulse quickened. They needed to move, now. "Run," she hissed, pulling the man in the opposite direction. The woods were dense, but there were always paths through them if you knew where to look. And Aaron knew exactly where to go. They sprinted through the trees, branches clawing at their faces and limbs, the sound of infected feet growing closer by the second. The growls were getting louder now, and Aaron could hear the unmistakable sound of snarling. The infected weren't far behind. "Do you know where we're going?" the man gasped, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Aaron's mind raced. "I'm getting us to higher ground. We'll lose them there." They pushed forward, but the infected weren't far behind. Aaron could feel their presence like a weight on her back, growing heavier with each passing moment. The man stumbled, and Aaron caught him by the arm, pulling him back to his feet. They broke through the tree line, and ahead, she saw the steep incline of a hill leading to a cliff. There was a ridge just ahead, a narrow shelf of rock where they could take cover. "We're almost there," Aaron said, her voice tight with tension. But as they reached the top of the ridge, Aaron's stomach sank. There, standing in the distance, was a figure, a silhouette against the dying light of the day. It was too far to make out clearly, but something about the way the figure stood sent a chill down Aaron's spine. "Who is that?" the man whispered, his voice barely audible. Aaron didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her rifle, scanning the area for movement. Her instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The figure didn't move. It just stood there. And in that moment, Aaron knew, they weren't just being hunted by the infected. Something, or someone else was out there, watching them. The figure remained still, framed against the dying light of the day. Aaron's grip on her rifle tightened, her heart hammering in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to act, to retreat, to disappear into the shadows, but something kept her frozen in place. The man beside her was tense, his eyes wide with fear as he clutched the ragged strap of his bag, glancing nervously between Aaron and the silhouette. I don't like this," the man muttered, his voice barely more than a breath. "We should go, now." But Aaron didn't move. She couldn't. The figure hadn't made a sound, not even the rustle of clothing or the soft crunch of footsteps on the forest floor. It was as if they were being watched by something that didn't belong to this world. Slowly, Aaron lowered her rifle, but only slightly. She was ready to raise it at a moment's notice. Something about the figure felt wrong, but it wasn't infected. She was certain of that. The way it stood, almost too still, made her think of someone who was waiting. Watching. The man's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you crazy? If it's a trap." "Quiet," Aaron snapped, her eyes never leaving the figure. For a long moment, nothing moved. The figure didn't step forward. It didn't retreat. It simply stood there, like a sentinel, watching them with an eerie, unnerving calm. The sun continued to dip lower, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward them. The air grew colder, the silence becoming suffocating. Then, without warning, the figure moved. It wasn't a sudden rush, but a slow, deliberate step forward, its form shifting into a more recognizable shape. A man. Not infected. Not undead. Aaron's heart rate steadied, but only slightly. There was something about the way he moved, something that wasn't quite right. He wasn't limping or dragging his feet like the infected. No, his steps were purposeful, calculated. "Who are you?" Aaron called out, her voice firm despite the unease gnawing at her. The man didn't answer at first. He took another step, then stopped just beyond the tree line, his face still obscured by the shadow of the setting sun. His clothes were ragged, but he didn't look like a typical survivor. There was something unsettlingly composed about him. Something cold. "I don't want any trouble," Aaron added, keeping her rifle trained on him. "Just tell us what you want." Finally, the man spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. "I'm not here to hurt you." Aaron didn't lower her rifle. She couldn't afford to trust anyone now. "Then what do you want?" The man didn't immediately respond. Instead, his gaze shifted toward the man beside Aaron, the one she had been traveling with. For a moment, Aaron thought she saw something like recognition flicker in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Who's he?" the man asked, his gaze never leaving the other survivor. "Do you know him?" The man in the shadows gave a small, cold smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not exactly," he said cryptically. "But I know who you are." Aaron felt a cold chill run down her spine. She wasn't sure whether it was from the stranger's unsettling presence or from the unsettling fact that he seemed to know far more than he should. She wasn't sure if she even wanted to know the answers he held. "Stay back," Aaron warned, taking a step forward. "We don't know you, and I'm not taking any chances." The man's expression darkened, but he didn't move. His eyes locked onto Aaron's, and there was a moment, just a moment, where the tension felt like it could snap. Finally, the man spoke again. "I'm not your enemy. But if you're looking for the safe zone, you're too late." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Aaron felt the blood drain from her face. Too late? That was impossible. The safe zone was supposed to be the last hope. The one place where people had gathered to survive. If they were too late. "What do you mean, too late?" Aaron's voice was tight with disbelief. The man took another slow step forward, his gaze never wavering. "It's gone. Overrun. There's nothing left but death." Aaron's mind reeled. It didn't make sense. The man had been so sure of the safe zone. He had trusted that it existed, that it was their ticket to survival. But now, this stranger, whoever he was telling them it had all been for nothing. The man spoke again, his tone almost pitying. "You're chasing ghosts." Aaron's hand tightened around her rifle. She couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Had this man been part of the group that had fallen? Was he telling the truth? Or was this just another cruel trick, another way to break their spirits? The stranger took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing. "But there is another place. A place you might still have a chance to reach. But it's not what you're expecting." Aaron's eyes narrowed. "What kind of place?" The stranger glanced over his shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone else was listening. Then, in a low voice, he said, "It's not a safe zone. It's something else. A place where people adapt. Where they've learned to survive, not just against the infected, but against each other. Where the world has gone back to the old ways." Aaron's mind was reeling. What could he possibly mean by the old ways? She had heard rumors of people living in isolated communities, but nothing like this. The man continued, his eyes flicking to the horizon. "You have to be careful, though. There are some people who would do anything to keep that place a secret." The words felt like a warning, like a threat. "Why should I trust you?" Aaron asked sharply, her grip on her rifle tightening again. "Why are you telling me this?" The stranger's eyes darkened. "Because the dead aren't the only thing you need to worry about." Aaron's breath caught in her throat. And in that moment, she realized, this world was more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. The man's warning echoed in Aaron's mind like a dull drumbeat, growing louder with each passing second. The dead aren't the only thing you need to worry about. What did he mean? And why had he chosen to tell them this now? Her gaze never left the stranger as she stepped closer, her rifle still at the ready. The air around them was thick with tension, the fading light casting long, jagged shadows across the trees. Every part of her was on alert, every muscle coiled tight, waiting for a reason to react. The man's eyes held a hard edge, as if he knew exactly what Aaron was thinking. "I'm not here to make things harder for you," he said, his voice low but steady. "But if you're going to survive out here, you need to understand something. This isn't just about avoiding the infected. It's about the people who are left." The man's words hung in the air, his meaning hanging just out of reach like a puzzle missing its last piece. Erin's mind raced as she glanced at the man beside her. He was looking at the stranger with wide eyes, his lips parted in disbelief. The stranger seemed to sense the unease. He shook his head slightly. "I don't have time to explain everything, but I can tell you this, there are groups out here, some of them have learned to adapt. They've learned to survive in ways you won't understand." Erin felt a chill creep up her spine. Adapt? Her eyes flicked to the woods around them, and then back to the stranger. "What kind of groups?" she asked, her voice edged with suspicion. The stranger hesitated, his gaze flickering to the horizon again. "Ones that use the infected as a weapon," he said softly. "Ones that have made it their way of life. It's survival by any means necessary." Erin's grip on her rifle tightened, her breath catching in her throat. The idea was unimaginable. People using the infected as tools? It was a concept so twisted that her mind had trouble processing it. And yet, she could sense the truth in the stranger's words. She had seen enough to know that humanity's capacity for cruelty had no bounds in this new world. The man beside her shifted nervously, his face pale. "That's not possible," he whispered, shaking his head. "How could anyone?" "People will do anything to survive," the stranger said, cutting him off. "Even if it means losing their humanity." Erin's mind raced. She had seen the worst of humanity before, but this was something different. How could anyone? The infected were monsters, things that had been human once, but now were just empty shells, horrible, bloodthirsty shadows of what they had been. To use them, to weaponize them, it was a betrayal of everything that made someone human. But even as she grappled with the horror of it, she knew the truth. The world they lived in now was a place where morality was often a luxury. The rules had changed. There was no going back. The stranger took another slow step toward them, his eyes hardening. "You want to find a place to survive?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can't do it alone. And you can't do it without knowing how to fight back, how to outsmart the ones who've learned to twist this world to their advantage." Erin didn't know what to say. She had survived by instinct and willpower alone, but this new knowledge, the fact that there were people out there using the infected as weapons, shifted everything she thought she knew about the world. She glanced at the man beside her. His face was full of doubt, but there was a flicker of something else too. Fear. "We don't have to listen to him," he said suddenly, his voice shaking. "This could all be some trick. We don't know who he is or what he wants. We've survived this long without trusting anyone, Erin. Why should we start now?" Erin's mind warred with itself. Part of her agreed with him. But another part, a deeper, darker part, knew that the world wasn't what it once was. People like them, survivors, were becoming rare. Trust was a fragile thing, but sometimes, the alternative was worse. She turned back to the stranger. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice cold but steady. The stranger didn't flinch. His eyes seemed to pierce right through her. "I told you. I'm not here to hurt you. But I can help you, if you're willing to listen." For a long moment, Erin considered his words. The man beside her shifted uncomfortably, clearly anxious, but she kept her eyes fixed on the stranger. He might be lying. He might have an agenda. But right now, the world outside was a twisted game, and it seemed that if they wanted to survive, they had to play by new rules. "Where do we go?" Erin asked, her voice a whisper of determination. The stranger's lips curled into a grim smile. "I'll show you. But we need to move quickly. There are people who'll be looking for you." "Why?" the man asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "What do you know about us? What do you want?" The stranger's eyes narrowed. "I know enough. And I want nothing more than to see you both survive. But the longer you stay out here, the more dangerous it gets. Trust me." The air seemed to grow even colder as Erin glanced at the man beside her. She didn't like it. None of it. But the harsh truth settled in her gut like a lead weight. There were no good options anymore. There were no safe places. Only people like this, strangers with their own secrets, their own plans. She nodded, slowly, her voice hardening. "Lead the way." Without another word, the stranger turned and began walking toward the dense woods. Erin and the man followed, their footsteps light but hesitant, as if the world itself might collapse at any moment. They moved deeper into the forest, away from the remnants of civilization, further into a world where trust had become a dangerous luxury, and survival was the only law left. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the more the world seemed to shift around them. The sounds of the abandoned world, the distant moans of infected, the hum of wind in the trees, the occasional flutter of wings overhead, seemed to fade. The stranger led the way without hesitation, his movements swift and confident, like someone who had walked these woods 1,000 times. Erin stayed close behind him, her senses heightened, every muscle taut. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves. The trees closed in around them, the light dimming further with each step. There were no signs of the infected in sight, but Erin knew better than to let her guard down. The last thing she wanted was to be caught unaware in a place like this. Beside her, the man was quieter than usual, his face set in a grim mask of worry. Erin could feel his unease, but she couldn't blame him. She shared it. This new path they were walking, this stranger leading them toward God knew what, felt like an act of desperation. But sometimes, that's all you had left in this world, the desperate hope that there was something, anything, that could get you through. The stranger didn't speak as they walked, but Erin noticed his occasional glances over his shoulder, as if checking to see if they were still following. She couldn't decide whether he was genuinely trying to help or if he was simply manipulating them, playing some game of his own. The doubt gnawed at her, but she had no choice but to keep going. Hours passed, and the sun finally dipped below the horizon. Night fell with a heavy silence, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Erin glanced at the man beside her, his face pale in the dim light, his steps growing slower with each passing minute. She could see the exhaustion settling in his bones. "We should stop soon," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's getting too dark to keep going." Erin nodded, glancing at the stranger to see if he would protest. But he didn't. He simply nodded once, then motioned to a small clearing up ahead. "This will do for the night," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "We rest here." Reluctantly, Erin agreed. She didn't want to stop, but they were too far from the safety of their previous shelter, and the risk of pushing on further in the dark outweighed the chance of running into more danger. The stranger moved swiftly, gathering some dry wood for a fire. Erin and the man set up a small perimeter, keeping their distance from the center of the clearing. The stranger didn't seem worried about their safety, but Erin had learned the hard way that trust was a commodity too expensive to give away freely. As the fire crackled to life, the warmth was a welcome relief, but it also made the night feel even colder. The flames cast flickering shadows across their faces, making the stranger's features look even more gaunt, his eyes darker. Erin caught him staring at her, his gaze calculating. It made her skin crawl. The man beside her sat down stiffly, rubbing his hands together for warmth. He looked like he wanted to say something but didn't. Erin felt the same way. There were too many questions, too many uncertainties, and neither of them seemed to know how to begin. The silence stretched on until the stranger finally broke it. "You're wondering who I am," he said, his voice low but not unfriendly. "I'm sure you have a million questions. But right now, it doesn't matter." Erin narrowed her eyes, her pulse quickening. "Then why are we here?" The stranger's gaze flickered to the fire, then back to her. "Because you need to know what's coming." Erin clenched her jaw, trying to keep her emotions in check. "And what's that?" The stranger's lips twisted into a faint, bitter smile. "The world isn't just full of infected, or the people who are trying to survive. There's something else. Something far worse." The man beside her shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flicking between Erin and the stranger. "Worse than the infected?" he asked, his voice skeptical but edged with fear. The stranger's smile faded. "Yes. Worse." Erin's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "We've seen what the infected are capable of. There's nothing worse than that." The stranger leaned forward, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "You've seen the infected. But you haven't seen them." A chill ran down Erin's spine, the words sinking in like sharp needles. "Who are they?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a long breath, as though considering how much to reveal. The fire crackled between them, and Erin felt the weight of the silence grow heavier with each passing second. "They call themselves the Wardens," the stranger said at last. "They're the ones behind the chaos, the ones who set this whole thing in motion." Erin's eyes widened. The Wardens? The name sounded like something out of a nightmare, and yet, it was clear that the stranger wasn't lying. There was something in his eyes, something haunted, that told her he knew all too well what kind of monsters these Wardens were. "What do you mean, they set this in motion?" Erin asked, leaning forward despite herself. "How did they cause this?" The stranger looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't know all the details. I only know what I've seen. What I've learned. But the Wardens are behind more than just the infected. They're manipulating the world, changing it to fit their vision. They control the virus. They control the chaos." Erin felt a sharp pang of disbelief, followed by a knot of anger. "So they've been playing us this whole time? Is that what you're saying? They started this, on purpose?" The stranger's eyes darkened. "Yes. And they've been manipulating people like you and me ever since. They use fear. They use power. They use the infected to control us." The fire crackled again, the sounds of the night filling in the spaces between his words. Erin's mind raced, the weight of his revelation pressing on her chest like a vice. If what he said was true, then they weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting against something far more insidious. Something that had orchestrated the collapse of everything they had once known. But who were the Wardens? What did they want? And why were they telling Erin this now? The questions swirled, unanswered, in the air around them. The stranger's voice broke the silence again, his tone hard. "You've been given a choice, whether you realize it or not. You can keep running, trying to survive. Or you can fight back. You can learn what they don't want you to know." Erin stared into the fire, the flames flickering in her eyes. Fight back. The words echoed in her mind. This world had already taken so much from her. But perhaps now, for the first time in months, she had a reason to fight. And the Wardens? They were about to learn that she wouldn't go down without a fight of her own. The fire crackled between them, casting erratic shadows across their faces as Erin stared into the flames. The stranger's words weighed on her chest like a heavy stone, pressing deeper with every passing second. The Wardens. The name alone felt like an omen. The man beside her, visibly shaken, rubbed his arms, trying to shake off the growing unease. Erin didn't know what to think. She had always known that surviving this world meant adapting, bending to the brutal realities of the new order. But this was something different. If the stranger's story was true, everything had been a lie from the start. The infected. The collapse. It had all been part of someone's twisted design. "How do we fight back against something like that?" the man beside her asked, his voice hoarse with fear. How do you fight against an enemy that controls everything? The stranger, whose face had been hidden in shadows, leaned in slightly, his eyes intense. You fight by taking back what they've stolen. You fight by learning what they don't want you to know. And most importantly, you fight by making sure they never control you again. Erin shook her head, trying to process it all. What could she possibly learn now that would change anything? She had survived by instinct, by moving fast, staying quiet, and trusting no one. Now, this stranger was asking her to trust him, to believe in something far darker and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. You want us to join you, don't you? Erin's voice was low, steady, as she looked him directly in the eye. You want us to fight these wardens? The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he met her gaze for what felt like an eternity, the silence thick with tension. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, he spoke. Yes. But not in the way you think. Not with guns or violence. The real battle is fought with knowledge. With strategy. The wardens are powerful because they control the flow of information. They make us believe we're powerless. They keep us in the dark. Erin felt a chill in her bones, and a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, stirred in her chest. Hope? She pushed it down quickly. Hope had no place here, not in a world like this. What's the plan, then? She asked, her voice sharp. What do you want from us? The stranger paused, then reached into his bag and pulled out a tattered map. It was worn, the edges frayed from too many hands touching it. He unrolled it slowly, spreading it out across the dirt in front of the fire. The map was marked with strange symbols, not like any map Erin had seen before. This is where the wardens operate, the stranger said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. They have bases all over the country. But their strongest outposts are in these areas. He pointed to several marks on the map, all concentrated in the heart of the old cities. Erin studied the map. Her fingers brushed the lines, tracing the paths that led into the darkest parts of the country. The infected territories. The places where life, if it could still be called that, had become nothing more than a shadow. The wardens aren't just using the infected, the stranger continued. They've found ways to manipulate them, control them. They've created a kind of army. And they're getting stronger by the day. Erin felt the air grow thick with unease. Army? How do you even control something like that? The stranger gave her a dark smile, a smile full of hidden knowledge. It's not just about controlling the infected themselves. It's about controlling the resources that can create more of them. And they've figured out how to weaponize the virus itself. You see, they don't just use the infected as weapons, they've learned how to make them breed and grow faster. They've turned the virus into a tool for power. Her mind whirled. A weaponized virus? If they were making the infected breed faster, if they had that kind of control over the virus itself, that was an entire level of horror Erin hadn't considered. It made the infected seem almost secondary, a mere byproduct of something far more insidious. But why tell us all this? Erin asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. You've obviously been on the run for a long time. Why now? The stranger paused. Because I've seen what happens when people don't know. When they don't understand the threat they're really up against. And because the wardens won't stop. They'll keep spreading, keep growing stronger, until they control everything. Erin's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always fought to survive. Always kept moving, never letting herself get too attached to anything, anyone. But this was different. If the wardens truly were this powerful, this methodical, then it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about fighting for the future. Fighting for something that could rise from the ashes of this ruined world. What do you need us to do? Erin asked, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts crashing in her mind. The stranger's eyes gleamed, but there was something else in his gaze now, something softer, almost understanding. We need to go to their stronghold. It's the heart of their operation. Once we get there, we can learn how to stop them. How to disrupt their power. But we have to move quickly. The fire crackled again, breaking the tension, and Aaron thought for a moment. A stronghold. The heart of it all. The idea made her stomach turn. But she knew deep down that there was no other choice. The wardens were the puppet masters, and they had controlled this world for far too long. How do we get there? The man beside Aaron asked, his voice cracking with anxiety. How do we even survive in the heart of their territory? The stranger's expression hardened again, the resolve in his eyes growing clearer. We go in carefully. We use the knowledge we have, what we know about the infected, what we know about their methods. But we can't make mistakes. Not in a place like that. Aaron nodded slowly. And if we fail? The stranger's smile was grim, like a soldier preparing for an impossible battle. Then everything we've fought for will be lost. But I'm not planning on failing. Aaron's breath caught in her throat. There was no going back now. She could feel it in her bones, the weight of this decision, the weight of what was to come. The war was just beginning. And now, for the first time in what felt like forever, Aaron had a cause to fight for. The night was quiet, far too quiet. Even the usual noises of the woods, rustling leaves, the occasional cry of an animal, seemed muted. It was as though the world itself was holding its breath. Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the eyes of the infected or something far worse were lingering just beyond the shadows. The stranger had led them through the night, always keeping a brisk pace, always alert. His sharp eyes scanned every movement in the trees, every flicker in the distant underbrush. His quiet confidence was both a relief and a burden. Aaron didn't trust him completely, not yet, but she knew he wasn't wrong. If what he said about the wardens was true, then every second they wasted was a second they could not afford. The man beside her, his face pale and drawn from exhaustion, kept up without a word. Aaron could tell he was struggling. The strain of this journey, of not knowing what lay ahead, was wearing him down, and she couldn't blame him. She felt it too. Are we getting close? Aaron asked, her voice cutting through the silence. The stranger didn't answer right away. He just kept walking, his pace never slowing. After a few moments, he glanced back over his shoulder. Close enough, he said. But we need to be ready. The closer we get, the more dangerous it becomes. The wardens won't let anyone near their stronghold without a fight. Aaron nodded, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle slung over her shoulder. She could feel the weight of the weapon in her grip, and though it was a familiar comfort, it wasn't enough. The wardens were something different, something that couldn't be fought with bullets alone. If they were as powerful as the stranger had claimed, if they truly controlled the infected, then they weren't just any enemy. They were the ones who controlled the very foundation of this new world. Do we have a plan? The man beside her asked, his voice tight with fear. Aaron met his gaze. He was struggling to keep his composure, but there was an edge to his voice that told her just how much the pressure of what lay ahead was taking its toll. We keep moving, Aaron said, her voice steady. We get in, we learn what we need to, and we get out. The stranger turned his head at her words, his sharp gaze assessing her. For a brief moment, Aaron wondered if he was going to call her bluff. She had no idea what they were walking into, no clue what the wardens were truly capable of. But if there was one thing she had learned in this world, it was that hesitation could get you killed. We'll need to be more than just quick, the stranger said, his voice low but steady. The wardens aren't just an army. They've got eyes everywhere. They control the flow of information, the movement of the infected. They'll know we're coming. Aaron's jaw tightened. Eyes everywhere. The phrase echoed in her mind like a warning. If the wardens could see them, if they were truly that powerful, then they were already at a disadvantage. But there was no turning back now. The map had led them this far, and every step brought them closer to the heart of the enemy's stronghold. She glanced at the stranger. How do we get past them? He didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the path ahead. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. We use the infected. We let them do our dirty work for us. Aaron felt a cold shiver run down her spine at the words. You want us to use them? Her voice was tight with disbelief. "We're supposed to use the infected to help us get past the wardens?" The stranger didn't flinch. "We can't fight them head-on. But we can make them fight for us. The wardens rely on the infected for their power, their control. If we can disrupt their connection, weaken the infected forces, we can get through." Erin stared at him, her mind racing. The idea was crazy. But in this world, crazy sometimes worked. It was a gamble, though. A dangerous one. If they made the wrong move, if they miscalculated even a second, it would mean their deaths. She looked at the man beside her. His face was pale, but his eyes were focused, as if the sheer terror of what they were about to do had pushed him into a zone of grim acceptance. He didn't speak, but his expression said everything. He was in this, whether he liked it or not. "We're going to need a distraction," Erin said, finally breaking the silence. "Something to draw their attention away." The stranger nodded, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "I've got that covered." Without another word, the stranger pulled something from his bag. It was small, cylindrical, something Erin didn't recognize. He held it up, the moonlight catching its surface. "This," he said, "is a trigger device. It'll release a scent that the infected can't resist. They'll be drawn to it. It'll give us just enough time to slip through their perimeter." Erin's stomach twisted. A scent for the infected? The thought of it made her skin crawl. But it was their best option, and they had no time to waste. She nodded slowly, gathering her courage. The stranger handed her the device. "You're going to set it off when we reach the outer rim of their stronghold. The infected will come for it, and they'll break their lines long enough for us to slip through. But once we're inside," his voice trailed off, the weight of what was to come settling on his shoulders. "Once we're inside," Erin said, her voice firm, "we stick together. We get in, we learn what we need, and then we get out." The stranger's expression darkened, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something like respect. He nodded slowly. "You've got the right idea. But remember, the wardens won't make it easy." The path before them grew darker, more treacherous. The forest had thinned, and the tall, skeletal remnants of what had once been city structures began to emerge through the trees, looming like ghosts. They were close. Too close. Erin took a deep breath and moved forward, the weight of the device heavy in her pocket, the fire of determination burning inside her. This was the moment. They had no other choice but to move forward. And if they were going to die, they would die fighting. The city stood before them, a dark silhouette against the dying light of the evening sky. The crumbling buildings, remnants of a time long gone, reached up like broken fingers, pointing toward a sky that had once been full of promise. Now, it was as bleak as the world below. Erin felt the weight of the moment settle heavily in her chest. The scent in the air was stale, thick with decay, but it wasn't the smell of the world around her that filled her senses, it was the knowledge of what they were walking into. The heart of the warden's power. The place where everything had gone wrong. The stranger led the way, moving with the practiced stealth of someone who had spent years living in the shadows. Erin and the man beside her followed closely, their footsteps barely audible against the cracked concrete beneath them. The city was eerily quiet, too quiet. But she could feel the tension in the air. The wardens were close. She could sense them, even if she didn't understand how. Their presence was everywhere, like an invisible net, watching, waiting. They reached the outskirts of the stronghold, the place where the warden's power was concentrated. Erin's hand tightened around the device in her pocket. Now or never. The plan had been set in motion, and there was no turning back. They were too close to fail. The stranger glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "When you set it off, it will draw the infected, just long enough to give us the opening we need. The wardens won't be able to stop us, not with the distraction." Erin nodded, her throat dry, her heart pounding. She could already hear the faint groans of the infected in the distance, the echoes of their twisted, mindless hunger. The distraction had to work. If it didn't, they would be overwhelmed before they even reached the heart of the stronghold. "You ready?" the stranger asked. Erin's eyes narrowed, determination flashing in her gaze. As ready as I'll ever be. The stranger didn't respond, his focus shifting back to the ruins before them. Erin could see the faint flicker of movement in the shadows, the subtle way the infected crept through the ruins, driven by nothing more than instinct. And there were far too many of them. Erin took a deep breath, then pulled the trigger on the device, activating the scent release. A faint hissing sound filled the air, and then the ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet. A low, guttural moan rose in the distance as the infected picked up the scent, their rotting bodies moving with a sudden, terrifying purpose. The distant groans turned into frenzied growls, and within moments, the entire area was alive with the sound of their hunger. "Go!" the stranger barked, and they ran. Erin's heart pounded in her chest as they sprinted toward the heart of the stronghold. The infected were everywhere now, shambling in droves toward the scent, their bodies twitching in a grotesque, almost mechanical rhythm. The warden's lines were breaking, their attention diverted as the infected surged forward. It was chaos, perfect chaos. They darted through the ruins, slipping between the wreckage of what had once been a thriving city. The walls seemed to close in on them, the buildings offering no shelter, only the cold embrace of desolation. And then, in the distance, she saw it, the central compound. The warden's stronghold. It was a fortress, fortified and ominous, the very heart of their empire. They were so close now. Erin could feel it in her bones. But as they neared the entrance, the ground trembled again, and a harsh, mechanical voice echoed through the ruins. Unauthorized entry detected. Intruders identified. Prepare for engagement. The voice was cold, emotionless, a perfect reflection of the warden's control over the world. And as the words reverberated through the air, Erin felt the weight of them settle deep in her gut. They had been detected. The wardens knew. A series of harsh lights flickered to life around them, illuminating the surrounding ruins with blinding intensity. Erin ducked instinctively, pulling the man beside her to the ground as a barrage of gunfire erupted from the stronghold. Bullets ricocheted off the crumbling walls, singing through the air like angry bees. "We need to move," the stranger shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Erin nodded, her mind racing. There was no time to think. They were in the heart of enemy territory now, and there was only one way forward, through the gate. They had to reach the central control room, the place where the wardens maintained their power. Another round of gunfire erupted, and Erin flinched as a bullet whizzed past her ear. She didn't wait. She ran. The stranger led them through a narrow alleyway, ducking into a darkened doorway just as more guards appeared, their faces hidden behind masks of cold metal. The wardens had been expecting them. "Down here," the stranger shouted, pulling them into an underground passage. The tunnel was tight and claustrophobic, the air thick with the musty smell of earth and rot. But it was their only hope. They moved quickly, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the narrow space. Each second felt like an eternity, and Erin couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted. At the end of the tunnel, the stranger paused, his hand resting on a rusted metal door. "This is it," he said. The control room. Erin's heart raced. This was it. The moment they had been preparing for. She stepped forward, ready for whatever came next. They couldn't afford to fail, not now. Not when the future of what remained of humanity hung in the balance. The stranger pushed open the door, revealing a vast, darkened room. Rows of monitors flickered to life, displaying the faces of the wardens and the images of the infected, twisted, horrifying, but somehow still human. In the center of the room, a large control console glowed ominously, the lifeblood of the warden's reign. And standing before it, bathed in the cold light of the monitors, was the warden in charge. A figure in dark armor, their face hidden, but their presence palpable. "You should not have come," the warden's voice echoed through the room, chilling and commanding. Erin stepped forward, her grip tightening on her weapon, her breath steady despite the weight of the moment. "We came for you." The warden's laugh was cold, mocking. "And you will die for it." But Erin didn't flinch. This was the moment, the final stand. As the warden raised a hand to activate the security systems, the stranger lunged, his body a blur of motion. The fight for survival was only just beginning.